Just to let you know, I've spoken.
Considering this was initiated over a year ago, like the price has gone up. Where we are, yeah. I would,
Yeah, I'm going on a tangent there, but I just know that's what Bubba's big thing is, the percentage allocation.
point of having a representative from each municipality and then one non-municipal voting member.
And that, I
With
believe,
some expertise in the field.
That would be handy.
Seem to have notes on that somewhere.
how will they be chosen?
The board of assessors or
Would-
the board of selectmen.
Would appoint them?
I would think that'd be acceptable.
Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
So Board of Directors, one board member from each,
Municipality.
Yep.
One at large who has some sort of expertise.
and one at large.
So that's 8.
No, it's five. Five.
5.
So a non-municipal
Four
voting member.
municipalities, one non-municipal.
Oh, I thought it was one from each, just one non-municipality. I thought you said one at large from each municipality.
So one at-large, non-municipal
member.
voting member.
Total of 5.
Okay,
And the 4 directors would appoint this person.
The 4 directors that are in this board of directors.
Would be
I
the
like
ones
that.
to establish.
That's really,
that's a good idea.
Not the 12.
Right, because if
board
it's
of
picked by the
12
town,
or whatever, yeah.
it'll turn into a nightmare.
Yeah. And this is recording, by the way, so everybody knows.
So-
And I'm making notes as we go.
So the board of directors of the interlocal.
4 directors will choose the 5th at-large person. We'll choose the non-municipal member, right? The one non-municipal member.
that's why we move on, I suppose.
Do you want to talk about duration of terms? Do you want to get that specific? 3-year terms, 2-year terms, or 1-year, 2-year, 3-year terms, staggering?
How do you establish the terms for a board to be staggered, which I think is always a good idea.
Yeah, it is. So basically, when you begin, you do
Initially.
1, 2, and
Someone's gonna
3.
be the one person,
Yeah.
someone's gonna be 2.
And then after the initial term, everybody is 3.
Well, the other complicating thing is what if you pick someone who's who's an assessor or selectman for one more year? Then they will.
But the board of each municipality appoints the person, so they would be able to
Decide that.
decide that, yeah.
With the school board, don't the plantations choose their own term limits for that?
No, it's a 2-year term and then, or whatever the term is, I can't remember how many years, and then it just keeps going up. I think it's 2 years.
That's determined by the state.
Oh, okay.
So do you want to cover the staggering terms? So,
It seems to me that a 1-year term is kind of silly on something like this, because once this is established, theoretically, nothing's gonna happen. Right?
Yeah.
So if you have a 1-year term, it's like, what did I just do? Nothing. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
mhm.
It's not like this is something that every year you're gonna have to make some changes to it. Once we get past the initial period, it should be.
3-year term staggered.
It's gonna be hard to get people to commit
I
to
know.
long periods of time like that when you start talking terms. I mean,
Then
realistically, what
what's-
will happen is somebody will get appointed to that board, much like we got appointed as delegates. And because you're involved in it, they end up staying involved in it. Because it's not like people are raising their hands to
Right.
want to be on another committee.
So do we leave it up to the municipalities and who serves every year?
I think so.
I think you have to.
I mean, if Rangeley wants to put
Okay.
a term on theirs, Dallas may not want to.
So the municipal officers in each municipality shall appoint annually a director to the board, right?
Yep.
Okay, wait a minute to type that.
And it could be every year they say you're it.
This should not be a time consuming.
No, that's what I'm,
Just
that's kind of what my point is. It seems
When
like
you
it's a
look at
silly
the
thing to
bond-
say for 1 month.
When you look at the bond repayment schedule, it's like question.
Okay, I think we've got that covered. What else do we need to know on board of directors? What about leadership?
Everybody gets one vote. Number. Period.
Or do you elect a chairperson, vice chairperson? Yes, yeah, you'll have to.
I don't know.
Never heard of a board of directors that doesn't have that. Right?
Well, maybe that's the person at large. Who were, as 4 separate municipalities, selecting to be the person at large, maybe that person becomes the chair. True. That work well.
What if you don't have a person at large in a seat?
You have to have a person at large, otherwise you have an even number, so you can,
Mhm.
result in a stalemate. You have to have an odd number.
No, I mean, what if there's not anybody appointed to that seat? You still need to operate somehow. I would think you would need a chairperson, a vice chairperson
Sure.
to be elected annually by the
Board.
board of directors, right? Everybody agree with that? Okay. Shall be a chairman and vice chairman. What I mean by that is chairperson elected by the board annually by the board of directors. I want to make sure board of directors annually. Okay. How often do you want to meet?
4 times a year or more.
Unless something urgent comes up.
You can always call on this meeting,
Okay.
but.
Or
And that might even be too much.
shall meet,
You might need more in the beginning and less in the
Right.
long run. So, is that good?
shall meet quarterly. How do I phrase it? The board of directors shall meet quarterly, provided there is business to conduct.
Perfect.
Good. All right. What else we need to know about the board of directors? Shall you be paid? Okay.
No.
Be paid. Okay. I think that covers that. Right? It's a pretty good framework.
I'm sure the attorney will make note of anything that she finds deficient. Authorize the board to negotiate and enter a contract with CCI.
Yeah.
Now, do you want it to be broad? And what I mean by that is, should it say authorize the board of directors to negotiate, enter into a contract for broadband services?
I suppose it should be broadband services, because what if all of a sudden CCI is bought in the next month, right, or something like that, or they back out and we decide we want to try to do is someone else comes forward.
Okay.
Has
Authorized,
anyone talked to CCI?
not recently. I sent an email to. Remember his name?
Yeah.
Yes, Jeff, a month or so ago, with a specific question. I'm not surprised he didn't answer back. It was about, a location that they asked if they would be served. I haven't heard back. I gotta follow up on that, actually. It was less than a month ago, I think,
They
actually.
pretty much reiterated that absolutely every,
This was a kind of an obscure one out in the,
they said that it
You're gonna
didn't
follow up
matter,
on
because
that.
I asked about our repairs, we got.
but no, other than that,
Yeah.
I haven't sent anything or received anything.
And nothing with the person who applied for it.
No.
So I would presume that the authority to enter into an interlocal agreement would have to be approved by our residents, as well as entering into
Bailey.
a contract and pursuing a bond. So with that language need to be introduced into the interlocal agreement
Mm,
and ready for that.
Why does it have to be in there?
I just presume that it does, that we would need. Approval.
Right, but don't you just put together the interlocal agreement and then this is what the minutes?
I don't know if the foundation of how we come to be needs to be incorporated in the interlocal agreement.
That's what you're saying.
That's what she's done.
probably.
Oh, well, this first sentence says establish the entity to be approved by municipal vote. Organizing.
Hmm?
I guess that's just okay. I'm reading that first paragraph.
Hey, good afternoon. There's an agenda over there, and this is the back page of it. If you want to grab this and grab one of those. The one that back page, just tear out and throw out. It's notes from something else.
So we're kind of just going through the outline for the basis of an interlocal agreement and giving our input. And we had talked about establishing a board of directors with 4 representatives, 1 from each municipality and 1 non-municipal voting member to be elected by the board.
A non-municipal voting?
Yeah, like I'm not on the select and not a.
Oh, okay, so
that
a
is
resident,
that's
somebody who has some expertise in the field of
Gotcha.
broadband and can actually act to help the.
But wouldn't be a citizen of one of the communities.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would be 5.
Yeah.
Everybody gets 1 vote.
So,
Just, I'm sure.
I've got some
gonna be able
notes.
to produce a document.
Yep. Well, I finally got Word installed on my computer, so I can do that now.
Oh.
I didn't have Word on this till about 3 weeks ago. So,
And we talked about that also about having quarterly meetings if there is any business. There may not be. And then we were just taking up the authorization for the board to negotiate and enter contracts
With a provider.
with a provider.
this board. For the board.
That's the
This
new
working
board.
group, of the new board.
Yeah,
And what docket, what paper you want?
next, the other outline.
Page 2.
Nope, oh, that one, got it. Okay. I've done them side by side, we're kind of referencing both. So do we need any further language? I think an attorney would have to let us know.
Yeah, just also for Liz, we also said the municipal officers will be appointed annually from the municipalities. And that the chair and vice chair will be elected.
So when you say the chair and the vice chair, would that be elected on the board? They would be voting on something? Okay. And have we thought about like term limits? I mean, there's times.
Yeah, we talked about it. We really didn't have a consensus, because if you have someone representing a municipality and it may not coincide with their municipal term.
So one of the things we do in Rangeley Plantation, like, and this might be like, we would have like an initial, maybe say it was an elected, maybe our next town meeting, or maybe it would be before our town meeting, maybe we would have to have an election in that position. January, we'll say, our meeting's in March. Like our school board goes from July to June, but in March, we actually elect a position for a term period. So say in January, we elect someone, it could be for the term until June 30th. And then at our town meeting, which I don't know, maybe it would be a little backwards for the first year, but in like our March meeting, like for our school board members, their terms go from July 1st to June 30th. In March, we would elect them from July 1st to June 30th. And say there's a change in that election, maybe someone resigns or maybe someone is voted in. They would serve until the end of the year on June 30th, and then whoever else is elected would serve on July 1st.
Yeah, I understand the procedure, and I think it's very relevant for someone who's elected, but these positions are going to be appointed by each
Oh, appointed.
board.
So like
your board of assessors.
They're not elected positions. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so it'll be a little different, but again, we're just throwing forward the basic elements of what we'd like to see. Then the attorney will be able to make comment and suggestion. But
Which would make sense because if it's not an actual legal office, then you wouldn't have an election. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we've done negotiations for a contract, right?
Yeah.
Authorized the
The order director.
to pursue a bond.
Yeah.
It has to be done.
This board will be able to pursue the bond or whatever finance. This statement here allows us to say we could go to a bank for a loan instead.
Right,
If we wanted to.
negotiate separate funding.
So we're changing it because before this group was going to bond, and because the bond probably would be coming from the establishment itself.
Main bond bank will most likely be the most viable resource, but we could do private bank. Should the bond banks issue dates not coincide with the contractual obligations that we come up with, depending on the timing? If you remember, that was November, and then there was for issue dates. And then I think it's May again. So depending on when you go to contract and what funding is necessary, there may be some wiggle room there, but maybe not. So if we have the authorization to look at the situation as it's presented, we'll be able to address it if it's pre-established. But of course, it would need board approval.
Yeah. So maybe I missed the meeting. I thought the last meeting was like July 8th or something like that.
Select board, yeah.
So how do we go then to not recognizing that we were going to be appointing a board to now we're appointing.
At that meeting, the quarterly meeting, which you did not attend, we had decided amongst all, the rest of us that we would have a two-pronged approach because the NTI grant is not guaranteed. And their issue dates or their awards date would be mid-November, which would be after our referendum vote. So in order to be prepared and not be at the back of the line and miss out on starting sooner rather than later, it was agreed that we would pursue both avenues to look at an interlocal corporation cooperative agreement and also pursue the grant.
So you guys, that was, so it's my understanding that the quarterly meetings were to like forward information. They are like the quarterly meetings are not meant to be a action committee. Is what I thought.
Bubba was there and we met, we met at the quarterly meeting and then we had a broadband delegate meeting subsequent to that.
No, prior to that.
Subsequent, after it, we had it before and after, afterwards, we had a delegate meeting, we talked about the press release. And we were
At the quarterly meeting.
after that night.
Yeah, I think you're right, Linda, because I think the quarterly meeting was at the end of June.
It was right,
Oh, I
it
was
was the
thinking,
beginning of July.
I thought you meant the quarterly meeting that we just had.
Yeah, that's what I.
Sorry, in July, we had decided to have the two-pronged approach, cover both bases. If we get the grant, great, but if we don't get the grant, we would be able to move quickly. Then we had a delegate meeting, which Joanne, Kate, myself, and Joe attended, and we worked on the press release that we had spoken about at the quarterly meeting and previous meetings to help educate the public. And we were looking to review these two documents, which we already had in hand at a previous delegate meeting in June, which was prior to the quarterly meeting. And we have not had a delegate meeting since until today. And then the quarterly meeting that we just had was an update, period. You haven't missed anything.
Well, I did, because, the delegate, or the quarterly meeting, I didn't make it, so I did miss that.
Yeah, it was just an update, but there was nothing was decided upon.
I don't recall determining that we were this far into like establishing a board of directors, but maybe we're not. How
Or
far?
not.
Okay. we're
This
just
is
not.
it, this is,
Okay.
we've been in it 15 minutes.
Okay,
So you
perfect.
missed the
Thank
first
you.
5.
Sorry, okay.
That's it.
And none of this is all for all of us, for all of you, really. I mean, just all of you to agree upon and then potentially go to a lawyer if November 15th doesn't happen. Or November the 15th.
This is where all of us to have equal input.
Oh, no, definitely. I just, I wasn't sure if we were going forward with appointing directors between now and November 15th.
No.
Oh,
No.
no.
We
These
wouldn't
are
have the
just-
ability.
Okay.
So you have to have an outline.
Answers to questions so that if on November 15th, they say, sorry, you didn't get it, we can say, okay, this is what we want our interlocal agreement to look like, so we can move forward with the alternate process.
Sorry.
Two.
Otherwise I would have gotten it.
That's all right. So we may,
Okay.
in fact, between now and then, determine that we would like to put what we compiled forward for an attorney to respond to.
If we get enough done.
Yeah.
Okay, so we established the board of directors. We know we wanted just something in there that's authorizing the board to negotiate and enter a contract with a broadband provider. you know, we need to authorize them to pursue a bond as a single entity or separate funding.
Does anyone want to add anything to that?
How about pursue grants? Does that need to be in there? I mean, it's kind of a given, but do we, if we put pursue grants in that sentence with securing other funding?
Well, is it relevant if we're entering into a contract, a 20-year contract?
I guess what if we don't get the bond, this one, or if we don't get this November 15th, and then if we find out there's another avenue for us to potentially pursue funding.
I'll shoot myself.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it wouldn't hurt, say we do
It
it.
wouldn't hurt if, for whatever reason, but
To negotiate separate funding, including grants for regional
Or
broadband.
just separate to negotiate funding. I mean, does it have to say separate? Is the separate point another sentence, which is if you want to get your grant, Liz, and I want to get my grant, and you want to get, not grant, bond, we're getting.
How about you could say or accept revenues?
or does this mean separate or? does it
or
mean different?
negotiate separate funding, I think covers that, which could be private bank or grant, correct?
Right, that doesn't mean separate as in 4 different entities, it means separate as in different. doesn't it?
Different from bond bank. That's the way I read it.
That's the way I read it,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would cover a grant.
So,
but I just want to clarify, Joanne, you were reading
Well,
it
that's why
differently.
I'm asking, is separate about, we can each get our own bond and bring it
No.
to the table, or the interlocal agreement is going to require that it be one single bond for which we are allocated for responsibility of liability.
I think that's a good question for an attorney.
I have a question that's kind of similar to that avenue. I mean, as our areas are developing, I'm sure everybody's seeing those larger tracts of land getting purchased and potentially divided. So as those new roads go on, we're guaranteeing like service to premise. Premise to me is to the home. So if you have like 20 homes on a 40-acre tract, you could have 40 homes on a 40-acre tract. Are we guaranteeing that those new homes are going to have internet to premise?
We are
Consolidated.
consolidated.
Okay, so yeah, but Consolidated doesn't own the fiber. So is Consolidated paying to have that new installation placed, or is our group? And if our group is paying for it, say Rangeley Plantation has 7 40-acre pieces that are divided into 70, whatever, is the group paying for that, or is Rangeley Plantation paying for that? Is Sandy River contributing towards our development?
It's my understanding that Consolidated would be bound for the expansion. However, since this contract has been in play for a considerable amount of time, it might be worth clarifying that. And we can talk all we want. We can have attorneys draw up something that's ironclad that we all agree on, and we get our town to vote on. We still have to negotiate with Consolidated, and I believe that would be part of it. Yeah,
But it's a very good question. Very good question.
because these,
Well, the municipality would never pay for that, would they? Am I not misunderstanding?
I think the
actually
municipality would
talked to-
require a developer to
Yeah, the
install that.
developer would do it.
Yeah, that could be,
but we'd have to bring that up to LUPC because we don't control that, which we're just speaking about with the redevelopment, revitalization of Southwark Mountain Road. That was all approved by LUPC without any consideration for the road, where if we were the town of Rangeley, we could say, okay, you want to expand, you want to reopen, this is condition of the road, bring it up to your expectations, you build it or you revitalize that.
As plantations, we don't have that.
We don't have that specific power, town of Rangeley does. We don't. That's something that we brought to Consolidated to negotiate. It's my understanding from what they told us.
That would be in their interest.
Right.
Of course, because they put the cable there, or the fiber there, those 40 places are all gonna hook up.
Because mind you, I mean, they have already said that even the fiber that exists today would be replaced with a new generation
Right.
of fiber. And I think that's the majority of their
Everybody.
expense. And a development that's gonna bring in 20 new customers, it would be to their advantage. But to have that clarified, yeah, not necessarily in the interlocal corporation, but that's a very good point to bring out in. Exactly.
I will let people know that that's just something that we're not, we don't know yet. It's gonna come down the line, it'll be addressed at a later date.
According to the contract, they are just gonna allow for development.
Yeah.
It says that,
Is
but
that
they
what it
will,
says?
yeah, but
Oh, that's good.
And that'll all come forward. We just have to get our experts to be able to go into the negotiations. But I'm sure it can do.
Okay, perfect. Next.
Allocation of liabilities and ownership. Are we sticking with a consolidated proposed?
It's a good question, because if you think about what we said earlier with each town having one vote, that's based on kind of an equal distribution. But if you talk about different percentages, so if Rangeley is 30%, but we only get a 25% vote, that's an interesting conversation to have. I don't know the answer to, but it's really, you folks would have to kind of come up with that
so what
locally.
we have is an allocation that is given to us by consolidated based on the amount it's gonna cost for them in each different municipality.
Mhm.
It's not mine, it's not mine.
Right.
Or it's based on
Yeah.
fiber.
Right.
Yeah. Fiber.
Which with development, that would change.
Yeah, it will change. And then at the end of the term, when you talk about an actual income,
But these three are never gonna catch up to that.
what three?
The plantations are never going to, each individual plantation is never gonna exceed what.
In terms of population, or fiber miles. Could,
It could, in
It
20
could.
years, it could. Yeah,
In 20 years. Yeah.
well, think about it, you've got all the land, and like Liz is saying, if all that land's developed into whatever, 600 homes, and that many more miles of fiber, and it's not, no more land in XYZ town, then that's an
Mhm.
interesting thing. It's almost like it changes every year, and it almost should be changed every year. But how do you do that? Because you've got the bond up front.
Mm,
I don't think you can
You
change,
can't,
you can't
so-
change the allocation.
No.
A really good financial person would be better able to answer that, or perhaps consolidated in what they've done in other municipalities. So I would put that forward for future discussion.
What do you mean?
I don't think we can answer that. We can come up with a conclusive answer on how that would be handled at this point.
Right, you mean how future growth?
And yeah,
Yeah. Well, the only thing that you could come up with is that there's no way to determine that, and we have to come up with something when you enter into the contract. So should we go with what Consolidated is saying it costs now, or do we come up with our own numbers?
Well,
Yeah.
we have, but I think we have to,
I'm so-
because this is looking at a 20-year contract based on these numbers,
Right.
irrespective of how many miles and how many service contracts they can get.
Right, they could all the
They
service
could-
contracts could come in by whatever thousand.
They've said that it doesn't matter what the service
contract
contract
is,
is,
Precisely.
the mileage.
So
It
that's
doesn't matter if they.
But our contract, our 20-year contract that we enter into is based on these miles and these numbers, and that's not gonna change.
Right.
So to try to project what happens in the future,
Well, don't
I don't
you
know,
think
the
they've
board should
probably
be-
taken into consideration that it's an area for growth, or they wouldn't be doing it?
no.
You don't think they've
No.
plugged some growth into it at all?
Well, the way it comes into play is that there's more miles in those areas. That's why your number's higher, even though your population is so small, right?
Yeah, we
So
always
it's kind of
find
built into it a little bit.
out.
You know, understand what I'm saying?
Because you would have people plugging into the miles.
Right, I mean, that's why Rangeley isn't as so much bigger than your numbers, because it doesn't have that many miles, whereas you've got all the miles, and so potentially you could subdivide it all and get more people. So I guess. yeah.
Wouldn't that be more, well, isn't what we're talking about more relevant for an exit plan?
Exactly.
Because that's the end of the contract. This contract, a specific term of 20 years, for a specific dollar amount,
Yes,
based on the percentages that are presented today.
Right.
Within the contract that we negotiate, they will handle expansion, and they will service each and every resident, no matter where it is.
Correct.
It does not affect these numbers at all.
So that's why I was saying, when you said we can't make that decision now, I'm saying we can, because or you can,
Not
because we're making it based on what today's numbers are. Which is-
Well, perhaps the question should be posed, differently.
Because this is basically, the price is for the bond
Right,
itself.
Exactly.
Because we shouldn't have.
That's
any
what we
extra
really should be
expenses.
Right.
focusing on at this point in time.
Are
And I
there
think-
other unforeseen expenses other than the bond that would be incurred, or?
No, well, not from our discussions with Consolidated, they're gonna pick up attorney's fees and engineering costs and, stuff,
I think
toll fees.
the question that we're talking about comes from one attorney's sheet where it says establish allocation of liabilities and ownership. And I tend to agree with you, that's kind of an exit. We can talk about it on the front end based on, what the numbers are from Consolidated, but it really, at the end of it, you kind of cash out and say,
Right.
this is what this person has. The questions that are related on the other sheet, which I think maybe we go in this direction to answer this, is how will bond costs be divided among the members and how will revenue be divided? I think maybe that's how we attack this question. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we have to take what's been proposed by Consolidated. The costs are gonna be covered by Consolidated unless there's a default. Revenues, until we get to the end of the contract, there aren't gonna be any revenues.
Mhm.
Right? That's part of the exit plan. Because do you remember Kirsten was looking at those municipalities that were owning and operating?
Right.
We are not in that position. We are a pass-through vehicle.
So
for
we
Consolidated.
will have revenues in the fact that they'll be paying whatever their yearly, monthly, whatever fee back to the group is. Will that be?
We'll have debt service, they'll pay the debt service, right?
Right.
So you'll never have it in your, it'll never belong to any of us.
Is it gonna be in one, is that something that needs to be in the interlocal agreement? Is it one? Are we using one bank account or one account?
That does need to be determined, I think, yeah.
So, because the bond needs to be, so the bond is sought after by this group, and this group has to allocate, or they're not really a taxing authority, how does the group get the money?
Consolidated.
For the bond.
Consolidated.
So like in the simplest
are they
fashion, it could be
obligated for
set
the
up
whole
so
thing?
they paid it directly.
The towns are going for the initial bond, right? Or this group is going for the initial bond.
Group is going to the initial bond.
Yeah,
So this group of directors is going for the bond,
right.
and they've got to get money to pay the bond back every month.
No, the bond payments are not every month, they're a couple times
responsible for writing checks to the bank or? are the
Now we don't know
municipalities-
if Consolidated can pay it directly or if, again, we literally act as a pass-through where it lands in an account, a broadband established account that is separate and distinct from the 4 municipalities. And then it's an automatic payment on the bond schedule.
Okay, and then the group would go to the municipalities for money because
No.
it's not an empty
Nope,
account, right?
no, the money is all generated by Consolidated,
Okay.
guaranteed to pay
Prior
this
to when
bond
we need it.
in its entirety.
So,
And then there will
it was
be,
my understanding that they could not guarantee it, that they were pretty much, we were taking it at their value, that they're going to be paying it.
no, it was just a verbiage that they could not write a contract to say that they would repay a bond. Because
So when we negotiate, it will be in
a
the contract.
service fee,
Okay, so the service fee,
It's
the
guaranteed. that
service
they'll
fee
pay.
will meet and exceed, because they were gonna put a buffer in,
okay,
the
Principal and interest.
principal and interest
On the bond.
on the bond.
okay, so they're going to be
They're
taking
gonna
care of
get
that.
Yeah.
So do we put anything in place in the event that they do not?
Well, you have to have a default plan, yeah.
Okay.
And I believe that that's also covered in the consolidated contract, and they would go to a receiver, and they have to continue with their service.
So when you say a receiver, what is that?
Someone else comes in and manages the,
Because the government would not let them just foreclose and move people on the
right side.
So they must have some type of insurance policy or some type of something.
I think it's just by law, because they are a provider of last resort. They're considered a provider of last resort, so they can't just shut the door and run away, like a bridal shop or stuff.
So that's good.
But again, all we're looking at is trying to get this into a
So
local
we need to put
agreement.
some of this in the agreement.
I don't know.
I think so. I think costs and revenues need to be included. And hearing what you're saying, so if there's an automatic transfer in ACH, if the dates are different, so if Consolidated places it in on one date and then the bond bank wants it on the day before or whatever, and they find insufficient funds, if we're just keeping like a zero balance in there between ACHs, we probably should have something in that account for that
Well,
reason.
someone who routinely deals with bonds would be better to answer that question, and I don't think anyone of us in this room is qualified.
And my understanding from what Consolidated said was that they would get us the money before it was needed. But I don't know if you put all that in the interlocal agreement, or do we just put a statement that says negotiate in the contract, and then some of the things that you're negotiating ensure that the funding is in time from Consolidated. I mean, maybe that's what we need in this document is what are we negotiating?
Mhm.
Does
Well,
that make
that's
sense?
part of the financial oversight, so I think that
Financial management plan.
Which leads me to another question, which and I didn't realize this, we kind of went by it. Do you think because I was looking at the other sheet, do you think the board of directors should have an executive committee or a staff to handle the corporation's affairs?
Well, we ran into trouble with that because then we came up with, who's responsible for the employee costs of that person. Like, if you have an employee, you're gonna have pay their insurances and pay employee taxes and.
I don't see why there's any need to if you negotiated the appropriate contract with Consolidated.
There should be zero,
Right.
almost, except for.
you need someone to be able to look at a financial statement, that's it, pretty much.
And that's what the
And-
board should be able to do.
The board should be able to do that, and the board of assessors in each municipality should be able to have access to that information whenever on demand, as public information.
And maybe as they amongst themselves, the board, they have, determined their president, vice president, or whatever their
Right.
positions, but they could also appoint a secretary amongst themselves for note taking, things like that.
Of course, they
For
can.
minutes and meetups and stuff like that, I'm sure.
But when you look at the bond repayment schedule, it is right here. So it's not even like paying a mortgage, right?
Shouldn't be an issue.
Monthly. This shouldn't be labor intensive.
And it shouldn't be, it's not gonna be like, okay, 2 days before the payment's due, you're gonna deposit. It should be like a month before the payment's due, it would be deposited or something like that. So that way the board could look and say, oh, there's the money, or no, it's not there, what's going on,
Exactly.
guys?
Again,
Yes.
also written in a consolidated contract.
Easy peasy.
Joe doesn't look like he's.
Joe's not fine.
No, I,
Like, well, let's go right now.
I'm thinking about audit, so you probably should have an audit function in your bylaws or this document, so that,
Yeah.
you know, somebody remembers to have an audit done.
That would be part of the financial management, you know.
Yeah,
Should be a very easy audit.
I don't have a very good poker face, do I? You guys can always tell when I've lost a thought.
I can't imagine the audit is so expensive.
No, $1,500, $1,000.
So if you look at the allocation of ownership and liability at the moment, we are all happy with percentages that have been put forth by consolidated based on fiber miles for this initial period, correct?
I happen to know that not all of us are, but I believe that's what we're going forward with. I know Karen Keith is not happy about it, but I'm not sure that there's an alternative method.
Would
He's
you
not
rather
here
pay
today.
25, each of us pay 25%, what's his idea?
I'm not sure. I just know that he's voiced his opinion several times. I'm not sure what the alternative. I would have to say that, yeah, if there's something different, but for now, that's what I guess the majority, I believe. is on it. But to say everybody's on board.
I think it'll all become point ratified once we get a Rangeley consolidated contract, right? Which we do not have never had. And then I'll be in black and white. And you can take it to your attorney and see what as we would do. I think that'll be really helpful, because it's been very speculative.
Absolutely.
Management plan for frequency of meetings and communications, we had said quarterly. Right?
We might have those coincide with payments.
Yes,
You know, We're at like
Yeah.
post-payment period or
Then
Have a
we-
chat
period or.
Yeah.
with it saying communication, Liz's point about a secretary is probably one that we should add to the,
list of officers,
yeah.
okay? So chairman, vice chairman, and secretary
Yeah.
shall be elected.
I mean, fundamentally, what we really want to see is the contract, they do the work, and then they send us the money. Right. That's it. For 20 years, right? Pay the bond, they have to pay the broadband, they do their expansion.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So restoration of initial contract to build 10 long-term and exit. I would ask the attorney if we need to have the interlocal agreement extend beyond the 20 years. Because
Well, it should, shouldn't it? So, because at the 20-year point, we need to have, make the decisions about what's going to happen.
the exit.
Who's gonna be the provider for the network at the end of that 20 years? I mean, suppose at the end of the 20 years, 3 different providers offer us a contract to operate our system.
Or we do another 20-year deal with Consolidated.
Right,
It's like, do you need an end time for this interlocal corporation?
I think that was suggested at one point, but maybe not.
Or have it be like 21 years or 22 years.
I would ask an attorney.
I mean, we know the
It sounds like
content,
usually
but
put a
why
time
would we
frame
want
on
to end our board just overseeing the internet?
Right.
So maybe we skip that one. An attorney who's back and says.
I think so that we should inquire about how we should say,
Yeah. I think so.
So the question is,
Ask.
what is the question?
Do we need to put a time period in the interlocal corporation? Does it have to be established for 20 years, or do we just never even have to mention how long? Or is it something that every 5 years you,
I'm wondering if the longevity had something, or the time period had something to do with like the lifespan of the internet infrastructure. They anticipate it's gonna last for 20 years. I'm wondering if that is
They said, yeah, they said that, because I questioned that because of our harsh environment being home rather than buried. Typically down on part of the country. And they say that it should last for more than 20 years. However, that doesn't account for breakage, ice storms, trees down, whatnot. But again, the contract is, as it stands, for 20 years. And then we move into a new phase.
I would propose, maybe 20, 25 years, because it's a round number. I mean, again, see what the lawyer says, but, you know, if people are happy with this, then I see no reason why they wouldn't do the work to continue it. If they're not, then it dissolves.
Yeah, I would ask the attorney.
I've got it written
Yeah.
in the questions.
Establish a default plan, I don't know. Default,
Well, that would have to, doesn't the default plan spell out the liabilities of the plantations? Should plantations then have to pay back the bond?
I think we would
a
need
catastrophic.
to know something more about what the law mandates that the company developing does in their rescue people. A little bit.
Yeah, probably in the contract. Because it has been dealt with, that question has been posed numerous times. And we've gotten assurances that they can't just pull out. And they would guarantee the circumstance of the life of the bond. Perhaps establishing a default plan has more to do with one of the municipalities.
Do you want to answer that question first? Can a member withdraw? Do you want to allow members to leave the corporation, and under what terms?
You can't restrict them to staying if their voting people decide they don't want to. You can't force people to remain into a corporation, I don't believe. There's always a way to get out. Probably a good question for the lawyer would be how and at what cost. It would not be a free
but the
thing.
lawyer's given us this list of questions which says, can a member withdraw? What happens to the corporation and any contracts the member withdraws?
Right, and I think that's a primer for a conversation about, do you want, whatever their financial liability is to the corporation, do you want to be
As a
made
taxpayer,
whole before they leave?
I can tell you that I would not personally support joining a corporation if I knew it was a lifetime endeavor. I would want an exit plan.
If a plantation withdraws, what are the implications? their customers are still gonna be getting the internet. Consolidated's still going to be taking in their $10 fee from every one of those customers.
Still paying a
And
bond.
the principal and interest on the bond are still being paid by Consolidated.
Yeah.
So what's the impact to the board if one of us pulls out?
You're on the hook for your portion of the bond.
If they default?
No, no matter what.
If
If we sign for a bond as in a local
Yeah,
corporation, you're on the hook until that's paid off. Well, we are technically, it's,
Theoretically,
we're pass through, as Linda said. So if everything's going
I
right,
don't think we can withdraw in this 20-year period. Right?
not without any,
There'd have to be financial.
yeah, you'd have to satisfy your portion of the bond.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
You'd have to satisfy that somehow, whether you pay it off and say, we're done with it. But you can't pay these off early, so you gotta keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's weird.
The thing would be like, I think it would be like if. Well, it's just an odd situation, I guess, because. Like even this school, we can withdraw from this school. We're not obligated to remain part of RSU 78 indefinitely. People withdraw, Lincoln withdrew a couple of years ago, I believe it was Lincoln. So this is not a binding group. People are electing to join or electing not to. It's not like.
You know, sometimes when people leave school districts, they have to repay their portion of what they incurred
Oh, no,
while
I'm
they
not
were there.
saying
So if
that,
they
but-
took a bond for a building, you gotta
But
pay.
she's saying you can, she's
Yeah.
saying you can withdraw, because I just said you can't withdraw.
No, you can.
But it might be like with the school, that's probably a little bit different because there's no guaranteed money coming out of the school other than by the towns paying their taxes.
Mhm.
With this group, there is guaranteed money coming in, so it would be maybe if, on the contingency of if they defaulted, whether or not there would be a repayment or not, I don't know.
If the company, our broadband provider, continues to pay off the bond, the monies that are due for the bond, and a plantation decided to withdraw,
Yeah, I guess the question is.
and you required the plantation to pay upfront the amount of liability they were allocated, where would that money go?
Yeah.
Because Consolidated is still paying.
It's not a revenue.
They haven't, I mean, they're still paying the bond. The
But what is it, so I guess the question is, what does it mean when a member withdraws?
Why would
Right.
they want to run?
What is the, what's the benefit of
Because there is no benefit, but I think that to say that it's something that can't be done, I think that you should always. look at
If you
it.
Well, I
withdraw,
think
does
the
that mean that
clause
no one in your town gets to have internet?
I don't
mean,
know.
Let the sentence off.
That's
There you go, yeah.
You know, a lot of this also might be predicated on the fact that they've not reviewed the consolidated contract or been in meetings with us. So it would make sense that if you're proposing to form a group, you would have an exit plan. And it might just be like pro forma, oh, well, you're putting this together, so you need to think about how you're gonna take their part.
So
So-
if
This might have.
if the company does not default, and I mean, really, the only exit plan needs to be if the company defaults.
Which is in the next line item.
Because
So-
then money has to come from the plantations or the towns. But as long as the company is operating and generating that revenue that pays for the month.
Right, it would make no sense for me to not do, but.
Right, so if there were a
Let's
default,
get rid of the default.
So it's basically, you really, the exit plan is only relevant, the exiting of a plantation and or town from the group.
Well, but maybe what this is talking about is if, maybe it's talking about giving the interlocal corporation the ability to act if the company, something defaults, right? Because if they default, you need to someone needs to act.
You have to have a
And,
municipal
and you
plan
need to know that,
of financial liability.
So maybe the default plan is to have the last resort service provider come in and do their thing. Maybe that is the plan.
They are a provider of last resort. I think that this line item and the next line item are redundant.
But it could also be that, the law, this main law, because you said that the state of Maine does not allow for company to do that. Maybe it is good to actually have a line item of default plan. So that when we're bringing this to the public, how many people are gonna say what happens if they default? Everybody is gonna say what happens if they default.
So
they
isn't
want
that
to-
covered in the next line?
Well, the easy answer is if they default, each plantation will be responsible for contributing to the bond what we have set as the liability allocation.
Maybe it's something as simple as saying that state of Maine, having a little couple of sentences in the state of Maine law, title, whatever, chapter, whatever. If consolidated defaults, then by Maine law, whatever, this will happen, and it will be whatever company comes in, and, I know that you said that it was stated somewhere, so maybe something simple like that. That way, if we have it in black and white default plan, not embedded in anything else, on its own leg there, people will see that, they don't have to read through anything else, and they, well, let's see what happens when it defaults, it will be more user friendly that way.
well, that's a good point, because, yeah, someone who knows more than I would be, is gonna look at this and say, this agreement doesn't have any default plan in it.
Or knows less than you know.
Ultimately, we're not gonna write it. An attorney's gonna
Right.
write it. So, they would also have a contract, CCI contracts, which I think.
So establishing the default plan is looking at the CCI contract and getting the default plan from that.
The default terms that are specified in the contract options of CCI residents with default non-network ourselves, bid out network to other providers, waited out in CCI and see if restructuring or new owner provides acceptable service. CCI is the provider of last resort. The contract agreement will provide for assignment of any contractual obligations to any successor entity in the event of sale or bankruptcy of the company. The following is a bit lengthy, but it's an explanation. Essentially, the difference between a Chapter 7 filing versus the Chapter 11 filing driven by provider of last resort obligations. Telcos don't file Chapter 7. Consolidated does not have the ability to withdraw from service based on regulatory obligations relative to providing voice service. In the event of Chapter 11 bankruptcy involving a plan of reorganization, keep business alive, and pay creditors over time, day-to-day operations will be overseen by a receivership or bankruptcy court until new financial structure can be established. We would still have state and federal obligations to provide service to local residents. So the town can wait out the reorganization, continue business as usual. This isn't the type of contract that would be renegotiated in a reorganization. This is the most likely outcome. Under this scenario, the town would have the option to declare consolidated in default of the agreement and rebid the network operation to another service provider.
So but that doesn't cover the.
Yeah, theoretically, you could have had a bond payment due. And you're waiting for the new contractor so someone is gonna be.
right. And that's where the earlier discussion about revenues comes in my mind. So say you take some ARP funds from each community and you just put it in this account. You put 30 grand in there. Just put it in there. There's a revenue. No, between the four of
We
us,
don't
we
get
have,
that much.
between the four of us, we would have it. So you put it in there.
I don't want to designate it up. I'm not saying I don't, it's not my choice. I know that ARP, that money can be going towards broadband,
Mhm.
but other communities may have it designated for revenue yet. We haven't specifically said, it's a good thought. Sorry.
We haven't either. I was just thinking, some revenue could go in there as a default
Right.
mechanism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's there. Whatever one bond payment is, that buys you 6 months. What is one bond payment on that, Linda? Is it 30 or 40 grand? Is it even that much or is it more than that?
Well, it's twice a year and it's like 200,000.
Okay, so it's 200,000. Well, so 30 grand isn't gonna,
200,000 a year or?
I've got. Too many papers.
I know you have it, because I saw it.
I
earlier.
do have it, but I'm moving on to chapter 11,
Oh.
bankruptcy, which means that you have to pay creditors.
Over time though, but then, so then we mess up the, does it impact your bond rating?
Possibly.
No, we're not
Not the
doing it.
municipalities. It would-
If you,
Yeah, so at the end of 20 years, if they wanted to go for another bond to upgrade whatever, who knows what even technology will do in 20 years.
Hopefully less expensive,
Yeah.
with more funding, then it may become a public utility, which it's not, which is why we're having to deal with it.
Mm.
So, this sheet, it said that, the proposes November 1st of 2022, the first payment of 32,000, and then
looks like it's $250,000.
And then in May, it's 32,000 again, and then the following year, it's 217,000. And then in May, it's 31,000. It's real erratic.
Mm.
That's
What's
weird.
this?
Mm.
Yeah. Strange that it's so low and then so high. It's
Fiscal
really
year.
low. Even here, I'm sure it's like paying down interest and that's probably why, but
Mhm.
it's strange.
So, I mean, would you feel comfortable having some amount put aside just in case there was a default? Something to think about.
That's something that the municipalities would have to determine.
Yeah, a large credit with the bank. And then you'd have to have a municipal, like, obviously an emergency town meeting, special town meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we would own part of it. This is more a financial person than an attorney's realm of discussion. I
Mhm.
don't think that do we have the expertise to answer it. We have the ability to question.
And other municipalities have now entered into these agreements with Consolidate, right?
Who do you have, other than the two groups that we know about, the Casad and the other group with Baileyville and?
So in Maine, nobody has a deal with posts like that,
Okay.
that's
Because I
been accepted.
checked with the Secretary of State's office and they had none.
Well, there are interlocal agreements, but they are not similar to this, because they built, own, and operate.
Okay.
We're not doing that. Consolidated is doing that for us,
Mhm.
but we are acting as conduit for their financing to the tune of the $5 million plus that they need.
I did talk with the Secretary of State's office and they told me they had 0 broadband internet interlocal agreements filed.
I
I did
spoke to them as well, and they couldn't find them initially, but if you call Baileyville, Rangeley Town Manager, and you call and speak to, Cotton, they have them and they will provide them.
Yeah.
They don't have a good search, and they're not apples for apples.
I did talk with someone, I think from Baileyville, left a couple messages because my other towns and the guy that I spoke with from Baileyville, he did mention that they do own and operate.
Yep.
So,
That's different.
and he did say they were in an agreement, so I'm like, well, I know one exists, I just don't know why we can't get. Yeah, whatever.
And that's probably right, they probably don't have the correct way to search their system to find it.
That could be, yeah.
Yeah, because I got down to someone within the Secretary of State's office, and they came up with great.
Which we have to.
But I had to go around the felt. To figure out, I didn't do a lot of work to get there. But New Hampshire and Vermont have similar contracts.
So with the CCI or just
Yes.
files? Okay.
But Maine is different legislatively, so we have our bylaw. It would be nice if we could just take someone else's, sit down,
Yeah, that would be nice.
but then again, we'd be at the end of the line.
And then, it's just kind of nice to just even see what anybody else has done, period. Don't say we're gonna copy it, but, just to see.
But that's what attorneys do.
Yeah.
Speaking of
Because they
it,
don't know our system.
speaking of attorneys, we're almost at the bottom of this list here. Do you folks have any thoughts about which attorney you would use? Not that you need to decide right now, but that's something that
A less expensive one.
kind of something to think about.
Taxpayers, yeah.
Don't need to decide it right now. I'm just curious before.
I think you have to see, like, I mean, I know your lawyer said that she has experience with this and she sounds pretty proficient with it. You guys as lawyers sound pretty proficient. Removal plantation doesn't for a king lawyer for that purpose, like, we have to find a lawyer that has, expertise in local fields. We have lawyers that are, maybe the one we do use as an option.
I'll put that in the notes. Just because I envision that being a question when we meet either on the 17th or at some point shortly thereafter.
What's the 17th?
The quarterly,
Oh, you said.
the follow-up quarterly meeting, right? Is that what we're calling it? It's not really a quarterly meeting, but it's a follow-up, quarterly follow-up meeting. Isn't that the date we picked or you picked? I think it is November 17th. November.
So it's like the day after the notification of whether or not we got the grant.
Pretty much, I think that's how it was done.
Mhm.
So it's like, when should we meet again?
Quarterly meeting, or should it be a broadband meeting?
Right.
It was gonna be a.
Where is it?
Yeah.
Who's hosting it?
6 p.m., November 17th, quarterly meeting, and well, everybody who was at our town office said they liked it because of the acoustic. It worked well.
Mhm.
November 17th.
It's a nice room.
That was the tentative that was thrown out that seemed to work around Board of Selectmen's meetings, assessors meetings. Wednesday was a better day.
Yep.
Yours are on
So
Monday,
Wednesday.
right?
I remember Mondays, yes. You said a Wednesday, that's what it was.
Wednesday, November 17th was proposed. So what are we missing here?
Can new members join? We haven't answered that question yet.
No,
Okay, and I also don't have any notes on withdrawal.
It would be expensive for them to join, I would think. Or maybe not, because of the, we have a bond that covers our own area.
yeah, well, we can have a new municipality.
The nearest one would be what, Phillips or Shaw?
Wilson's Mills,
Yeah, right.
Lettery,
Yeah, right, but everything.
Wilson's Mills, Reddington.
They'd be better off doing this on their own. I mean, how do we expand the contract? You can't because
You can't.
You have to
consolidate.
rebond, you have to.
Right, so.
So let's answer that as,
No, perfect, thank you. And then the plan to cover financial liability, I have that as a heading, but I have no notes under it. You want some more time to think about that? I know there are technical aspects of it, but then there's, the kind of having something put aside, kind of, I don't know what to call
emergency
it.
fund.
Yeah, the kind of the emergency aspect of it, should you have something in there?
I think we have to.
Is that something you negotiate? Well,
Well, you can't open an account with a zero balance.
no, exactly.